Hello again, everyone. Steve Scott here, and welcome to another edition of our Kaizen online learning program. Well, today we have a good one. We are going to be talking about belt ranks, and what a good friend of mine many years ago, Bill Clark, coined the phrase. What he said was the world of belts, that we in the world of martial arts tend to live in the world of belts. So, that being said, I am going to discuss quite a bit about the history of how belt ranks were formed. A lot of people just assume they were there since the dawn of time. Just like the highway system in the United States, the interstate highway system. People are surprised to find out it wasn't developed until 1956. Well, rank in the martial arts wasn't developed until Jiro Kano did it actually in 1883, just the year after he founded the Kodokan in judo. And we're going to be talking about a bit of history and how ranks are very much tied into the history of martial arts, and certainly our modern adaptations of the martial arts, and the various rank systems and so on. So without further ado, let's get at it. There's a lot of material, and I hope I can cover it as quickly as possible and in one video setting here. If not, we'll go to two, but we'll do what we can here. Okay, the world of belts. First of all, my source material. I have several books that I would highly recommend. One, I'm looking at them here. Holding them up in front of you doesn't do a whole lot of good, but one of the best ones, if you can get it, is by Sid Hoare, a Brit, and it's called A History of Judo. An excellent resource material. Really one of the best books I've ever read. It really is. So Sid Hoare hit a home run here a few years back, and writing this wonderful book. So I would highly recommend that. Another one is Saving Japan's Martial Arts by Christopher Clark. Another very good historical resource material that I think you would find very useful. Another one is The Way of Judo, a portrait of Jiro Kano and his students by John Stevens. Very good read, very good book. I would use that if you're a history buff like me. I think you'll like it. And two of my favorite authors I constantly refer to are Jeff Gleason, any number of his books, but one I've been using for this particular video is All About Judo, and that's one of his best books, actually. And also, I think Judo Inside Out, I've used a little material from there as well. So Judo Inside Out by Jeff Gleason, and anything you can get your hands on by Don Draeger, okay? Now, the source material for this video is called Modern Bujitsu and Budo, in a series that who did this? Weatherill put out, the publishers, and it's by Draeger. It is an excellent book. Anything by Draeger is excellent. Same with Gleason, and same with Sid Hoare and all these other guys too. But anyway, so if you want some really good resource material on the history and development and reasons for belt ranks and the structures, I would highly recommend it. There's a lot more in those books than I can put on a video here. Even though I do blab on, it is short compared to what is written in these books, and I would highly recommend that. First of all, let me say the person who invented belt ranks, as we know them today, is none other than Jiro Kano. He was a genius. He is not only the founder of judo, he is also recognized because he is the founder of Japanese physical education. He is also the man who started the Japanese Olympic movement, and in 1909 formed, I believe it was 1909, formed the Japanese Olympic Committee. So he got Japan into the Olympics. In fact, he was in 1912 at the Stockholm Olympics. There was Jiro Kano leading the procession in the Olympics for Japan. So he is that important in Japanese sports and physical education history. And one of the big things he did, of course, was the development and founding of the Kodokan and Kodokan Judo. And as part of that was the development of ranks. I've often said that when Kano developed ranks, it may have been one of his mistakes. But in looking back, hindsight's 2020. We can say, well, we have all these problems with ranks today. People have this rank, people have that rank, and I'll tell you, when we talk about rank, it's like talking about religion or politics. It always seems to offend somebody, or somebody else agrees with you 100%. So, but rank is one of those subjects that is sometimes sensitive to people, and there have been some abuses in rank through the years in all martial arts, judo, jiu-jitsu that I'm mostly familiar with, but we've seen it for a long time. So in any event, With all that being said, and that history being down, let's look at why Kano developed ranks and what their purpose is and what the purposes are of ranks and so on. So let's look at this. From my study, Kano developed ranks. By the way, I will give a little timeline of history here in a moment of when the first year he started awarding black belts, things like that, when the rank system was developed, things like that. We will talk about that momentarily. But right now, let's look at what I think are the three big reasons. And I keep looking over here to my right, referring to my notes, so please forgive me for that. And I will have some water from time to time because I do have a kind of a horse in my throat or something. But anyway, three main purposes for Kano and his development of the rank structure as we pretty well know it today. Number one, he had to give in the early years of the Kodokan, in his fledgling teaching. He was a young man, remember, he was in his 20s. Brilliant young man, but he was still a young man. And he had to give the Kodokan structure. Okay, and one of the ways is because he was an educator, trained and spoke fluent English, by the way, and I think he spoke German as well, but he was trained in Western methodology and pedagogy at the best available stuff at the time. He also respected deeply the Japanese culture. So he had to combine the two because he was dealing at that time with the Japanese in their own culture, and he wanted to infuse some Western ideas. But one of those ideas was the real structure of an educational or training system for judo. So he saw that ranks gave him some structure in doing that. Okay, that was number one. Number two was the relevance or the standing of the individual within the structure. Okay, so he's developed a structure. Now he's got to develop some kind of relevance or standing. Look at modern how we award university degrees or college degrees. You get your bachelor's degree, then you go on to your master's, then you go on to your PhD or EDD or whatever it may be. Later on, if you want medical doctor, your MD, DO, whatever all those titles are, but they're all advanced training and they're all levels of education. Well, Kano was an educator. He was a teacher at heart. And this is why I say we need to look at the rank structure and how it's done, and ranks in martial arts, and my background primarily in judo, and some in jiu-jitsu, but primarily in judo, is we need to really look at ranks as, like Kano did, as an educated, or as an educational sense. Okay, so you don't just hand out a black belt because he paid a lot of money, or he's your buddy, or he's the toughest guy on the block, or whatever it is. That's totally mistaken. It gives structure and relevance of those people who are in that structure. The third, and probably the least important, but it's still highly important, and we'll talk about this momentarily here, is that it rewards or recognizes, and again, part of that rank, the standing within the community, it recognizes the person for his or her achievement or ability or education in some phase of martial arts. Now, Kano was a really bright guy. He wasn't just an educator. He was also good at selling judo. And part of that selling of judo, the Kodokan judo, because he was competing he was the upstart. He was the new guy on the block, and he was competing with other more established fighting arts, especially the grappling arts, the jiu-jitsu, the striking, that type of thing as well. But he was competing with them, so he had to sell it. And right from the start, ranks were very popular. And they still are, aren't they? I mean, let's face it, they are. Okay. But Kano knew he had to sell judo, like I just said, and the rank structure he developed was part of that selling of judo. It gave people outward recognition for their achievement or their standing within the culture, with the subculture of judo or martial arts. Okay. So three primary reasons. It initially gave a structure to the Kodokan and Kano's teaching. It gave, within that structure, it gave those people relevance or standing who gained rank, and because they gained rank because they were rewarded for their achievement, okay, or recognized for what they had done, their educational learning. Now, one thing a lot of young people today, I've heard this from actually arrogant young men in judo or whatever it may be, jiu-jitsu, could be anything. But I heard a young man tell me one time, some years ago, saying, well, because he could beat all the black belts in this particular club, or he thought he could. He should be higher ranked than them because he could beat them. Again, let's go back to the purpose of rank. It's a structure to help enhance learning. That's what Kano wanted it to be, and it still should be, right? I think so. And it shouldn't be just for the toughest guy. If we gave rank based on who beat who, then it would be only the tough, predatory. Not all tough guys are predatory, but not highly athletic people who may only have one or two skills, but they're so athletic they can beat everybody with those skills, and it totally throws out the educational background or purpose of the martial arts. And in this case, we're talking about judo. So ranks do give structure. Now, personally, I'm not big on the ranks. I think I'm overranked. I think a lot of you probably watching this are overranked. I'm sorry if I offended you, but it may be true. We tend to puff ourselves up quite a bit with rank, and I think that's a really downfall of one of the rank systems. And I think that I've said this many times to people, and again, Kano saw this in human nature right from the start. Ranks were popular. They still are. Ranks are like ice cream. Once a little kid gets a first taste of ice cream, man, he wants to, how can I get more of that ice cream? Well, ranks are the same way. But boy, I got this belt. How can I get more of that belt? How can I get a higher belt or a bigger belt? A belt with not just a black belt. I want a multicolored belt with gold tassels. And there are people who have gold tassels on their belt in various systems of martial arts. God love them, but seems a bit odd for me. But anyway, that's what I say about rank. We tend to take too much of it. If we use it for its purpose, what I think Kano was really, and I've read a lot what Kano was writing in there, and I think that if we use it for the original intent or the intention of structure, relevance within that structure, and to reward achievement, and not just achievement and winning and being the toughest guy, but in actual learning and understanding and performance of the martial art in hand, whatever it may be, the particular martial art. So those are the three primary reasons that Kano developed belts, and I think those three reasons still stand. I think they have great relevance today, and they've stood this test of time. So let's kind of move on here. All right. Let's look at a little bit of history about the world of belts. By the way, I want to expand real quickly. I call it the world of belts because in 1977, I was attending an AAU Judo Committee meeting. At that time, the AAU was the governing body for Judo, and that's before the Presidential Sports Act in 1978. Things changed, but at that time, we were having a big discussion in an AAU meeting about judo. It was a judo meeting, and rank came up, and it was proposed that something about people should get more votes based on how many Dan grades they had or something like that. And an observer, an AAU observer, who was a non-judo man, a non-martial arts guy. In fact, he was a weightlifter, a powerlifter. He did both weightlifting and powerlifting. Bill Clark, who became kind of a mentor of mine actually in sports and writing. He's the one that got me actually into writing actually. But anyway, he said to me, we were talking afterwards, and he said, but it's true is what he said. He said, you seem to have a little more common sense than some of these guys. He said, they live in this world of belts. He said, you don't seem to be too hooked up into that. What's the deal with this world of belts? And it was the phrase, that was the first he coined the phrase, Bill Clark did. And I explained to him that to some people in the martial arts, it's quite important. Others of us, it is important, I guess. Yeah, sure. It's a good recognition, but we tend to look at it a little more educationally based and so on. I was kind of firm in my belief back then and still am. And he said, well, this world of belts, he said, you're more concerned about that than you are actually getting good at what you do. And he made a good point. So I think if we be less concerned about the belt around our waist and more concerned about what it took to get it there, I think we might all be better off. So much for my editorializing, but it is my video, so I can't editorialize. Again, if I offended anyone, that's the way I believe. I know that I may get some emails and phone calls about this, but so be it. Anyway, let's get back. Again, I'm going to take a quick drink here. And that was water. Let's talk about the history of how Kano developed belts. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of judo and history of the martial arts development in Japan. So here we go. In February of 1882, a young man by the name of Jiro Kano, who, by the way, has started jujitsu in 1877. 1877, Kano started his training in the martial arts, and Jiro Kano, in February of 1882, started teaching at the Eishoji, the Eisho Temple in Tokyo, at his own school. He opened up his own dojo, his own academy. He called it the Kano Juku, or Kano Academy. So February of 1882 was the actual genesis of Kano starting. And at that time, he only had 9 students. And the first one, and this is relevant, in a moment we will talk about this person, but he started with 9 students, and I'm looking here, and the first to enroll in that school, that fledgling Kano Juku, was Tsunejiro Tomita. Okay, and we will talk about him in a moment. But anyway, February of 1882, June 5th, 1882, Kano formally established the Kodokan. He broke off, he established the Kodokan Judo, what he called Kodokan Judo, school or academy, school to learn the way, Kodokan Judo, adaptable, flexible philosophy or way. That name had been taken before by 1 or 2 other jiu-jitsu systems, but never was highly used. Kano made it famous, Kodokan Judo, the word judo. Okay, but he was the first, I believe, to call it Kodokan Judo. Anyway, so in 1883, by the way, the first, like I said, the first to enroll in the Kodokan, who went on to become the Kodokan, was Tsunejiro Tomita. Okay, and then in 1883, the first female student to enroll with Kano was Sueko Ashiya. And so, by the way, I want to make reference, people like Sid Hoare, Jeff Gleason, Don Drager, Martin Clark. Let me see here. I'm using John Stevens. I draw heavily on their work. So, this is good work. I would really recommend these books. I'm using quite a bit from Sid Hoare's book, by the way. It's a History of Judo. I would highly recommend it. But at any point, so in October of 1883, Jiro Kano was awarded his Minkyo, or teacher's license, by Tsunetoshi Ikubo in the Kito-ryu Jiu-Jitsu system. Okay, so Kito-ryu was the primary, the style that Kano was studying. He studied 3 primary styles, and Kito-ryu was the one he was doing quite heavily when he developed the Kodokan. And Kito-ryu, as I recall, emphasized throwing and nagewaza, throwing techniques, or atewaza or atemiwaza, striking techniques. That's the 2 phases they really emphasized, and that's why Kano had a particular great interest in the throwing techniques, and that's why in judo today we see judo matches start standing, and this more heavily influenced throwing techniques than we do the ground fighting, although ground fighting is very, very complete in judo as well, but still, that's why we see this Kano's preference for nagewaza, the throwing techniques. Anyway, in 1883, Jiro Kano saw that he needed to develop some structure to his Kodokan, because what was happening was that he had some really tough guys in his dojo, and they were doing a lot of early forms of randori, because he got the concept of randori from Kito-ryu Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, so they used what they call rano toru, which is freedom of action. Well, that's what randori basically is, and they did a lot of randori training, but there wasn't a lot of skill acquisition. Okay, there wasn't a pedagogy about it, or a methodology of teaching, no system. Well, Kano he saw, being an educator, being a graduate student in education, he saw that was necessary, and it is. I mean, structured learning is vital, and so he wanted to provide some structure. So while he was doing that, while he was providing the syllabus, developing the kata, things like that of judo, which was the structured forms to teach judo at that time, he started to develop the idea of a rank structure, so people could progress from beginners on up to more advanced levels. And again, I'm going to be scouring over my notes here because I wanted to make sure some of these things were correctly listed here. Um, Here we go. Okay, so in 1884, Kano developed his structure, his first formal structure of rank in Kodokan Judo. And this was the first formal structure of rank or progressive ranking in martial arts. Now, in the old Budo or Bugei systems, there were systems, there were older systems of what they called the Minkyo or licensing system for progression, passing the secrets of the system on to the followers of the particular Ru or school or way of training. And Kano, being an educator, wanted to kind of broaden it out a little bit. So he developed initially 3 student grades or basic grades or levels and 3 more advanced levels. And that's what we now call the Q Dan system, Q and Dan. We will talk about that quickly here, actually. But again, in October 1883, Kano was awarded his Minkyo in the Kito-Ru system, and he then developed, by 1884, a formal structure. Now, initially, at that time, new students, and I get this directly from Sid Hoare, so I give him entirely the credit for this, doing all the research on it. New students at that time in the Kodokan were called Hoshinsha. Hoshinsha. And now, an examination of this word, Hoshin, is to be converted, a convert. And a Hoshinsha is one who has been converted. Okay? So you've been converted. You've been taken in. Not taken in fooled, you've been taken into the group. Okay? And that's what Kano, was implying when he gave this name from what I've read historically and in other sources here. Now, initially, according to what Sid Hoare writes in page 68, I might add, of his great book, A History of Judo, a light blue belt was initially worn by all these Hoshinsha, these new converts, these very new novices. Okay. Now, in reality, it was in 1906 when Kano developed what we now know as the Judo gi, and they were. The jackets that were worn were of different types in those days, and the pants, and the belt was pretty much a sash just to hold the jacket together, and that's what the judo gi was, the uniform was. And in 1906, Kano redesigned it and standardized it, as we now know: longer sleeves, longer apron, longer pants, and the belt double width around, wrapping twice around us to stay on better. And so in 1884, he developed 3 student grades, 3 advanced grades, and he structured those into what are called Mudansha and Udansha. Now, Mudansha, I want to make sure my notes, I know this pretty well here, I've known it for years, but still, a Mudansha is considered ungraded. A Udansha is a graded person. In other words, you have achieved advanced status in our structure of what, in our world of judo. Okay, so the Mudansha ranks were Sankyu, Nikyu, Ikkyu. Okay, 3rd, 2nd, 1st class or step or level. Q and Dan pretty much mean the same thing. They mean level or step or grade or class. It's a classification. It's a progression type thing. So that was a Mudansha. We call it ungraded, but actually it's based on the Japanese Shinto understanding and philosophy. And it gets kind of deep here, I guess, but this is what Kano, again, he had some modern Western ideas, but he came back to the Japanese culture that he knew and grew up in the Shinto culture here. And a mu is nothingness or void. It's nothing, it's just blank. Okay, you're a blank slate. Mu. Dan is a step or level, and Sha is one who has attained it. Okay, so Mudansha, one who is really, at that level of beginning, starting your journey. Okay, you're starting. It's a nothingness. It's new, And let me make an adjustment here very quickly. Okay, good. All right. So I'll put these books down here, by the way. So that's mudansha. Okay, now a yudansha, yu is something substantive, or it has content. Okay, there's something to it. Okay, and a yudansha is a person who has substance, who has attained something. You have attained something when you have you. And again, this is based on some Japanese Shinto philosophical ideas. And that's where Kano got the phrases mudansha and yudansha. So when you are a black belt, you are a yudansha. Okay, you are graded. You have made the grade. Okay, and in 19, I might well skip ahead a bit here. And in 1922, to award these Dan grades on a little more formal basis, Jiro Kano formed the first Yudansha Kai, or Black Belt Association. So a Yudansha now was a black belt, and we're going to talk about when Yudanshas first started wearing black belts. So we know in 1884, Kano developed this system of Mudansha Yudansha for ranks, the Kyudan system. Okay, and in that year, in 1884, he made his first promotions to Shodan, the initial grade. Sho doesn't mean first, but it means first in a series of things. So it means initial. So when you're a Shodan, you're an initial grade. You're a newbie. It's like a bachelor's. I often refer to as having a bachelor's degree in a college or university. Okay, you've got your basics, and now time to go on to more advanced training. But anyway, the first Shodan ranks were issued to, remember this guy from a few moments ago, Jiro Tomita, one of his key students. And if I'm not mistaken, Tomita went on to be a 10th Dan, I think. He was one of the people who was very formulative in the development of, very instrumental in developing what came to be known as Kosen Judo, or more newaza ground fighting type judo as well. So he was a very influential guy, certainly in the early years of the Kodokan. Tomita was. The other to get the Shodan at the time was one of Kano's favorite students, Shiro Saigo, who was his toughest guy. Back in those days, he was the guy to go to if you had something to do, some dojo bashing or whatever, and needed that answered. Kano called on Saigo to get the job done. He was a champion of many of the early Kodokan contests and so on, and jiu-jitsu contests. So Saigo was along with Tomita, were the first two to get Shodan. Now, it wasn't until 1933 that the first woman to be awarded a Shodan, was Katsuko Kosaki. And it was in 1933. So the first woman to get a Shodan was a number of years later, in 1933. Okay. Now, it was in 1933, yes. In 1886, jumping back. So we know that Kano developed the system in 1884. He had it fairly formalized, and that Tomita and Saigo were the first two Shodans. But the first time that we know of, in a number of different sources that I've read, was in 1886. Sid Hoare kind of pins it down on that date, and I think some other people have too, that the first known wearing of the black belt or black sash to designate the Yudansha, or the graded person. Okay, so it was in 1886 that we actually saw the onset of black belts, and there's speculation as to why. Kano, I think, liked the concept of being black was, again, going back to the concept of mu and yu, you having attained something or filled with knowledge or that type of thing, Shinto basis. Just supposition, or not supposition, but an educated guess on my part and other people's part was that he chose black because it was definitely the opposite of white, which signified a total blank slate or nothingness, a total purity. So purity of not having any knowledge at all at that point. That was the mu. Well, the yu was the black belt. So that's one thought. Another thought was something as mundane as being an educator and being around college students. he saw that I think the college swimming team or the high school swimming team that he was around at some point, they all wore black trunks to designate they were on the varsity team. So, again, structure is important in Japanese culture, but look at our culture. Structure and rank designation is important to us too. So, yeah, it was very, Japan being a very structured society, especially in those years. So you did tend to see these different levels of progression and different levels of stature within the culture. Well, we have it too. Okay, I mean we do too. So, but this is a little bit about what Kano did. Anyway, 1884 was the first wearing of or first 1886 was the first wearing of a black belt. So now that we know it. So let's fast forward a little bit into 1932. Up until 1932, all Yudansha wore the black belt. By that time, the structure had been widened to 5 Q ranks and 5 Dan ranks. Okay, and now we have Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, Yondan, Godan. Okay, Godan being 5th. We now had that, and in 1932. Again, stretching my notes here, we see that Kano and the Kodokan in general, he had formed a Kodokan committee there to do this. They had formed a committee to develop ranks and rank structure. They started using the red and white belt for ranks. Now they upped it to 10 Dan grades. And it was now 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th all wore red and white belt, okay? Or they could wear a black belt in normal practice. And red belt was reserved for the Judan, or 10th Dan, okay? And again, at this point, let's talk a little bit about etiquette now. It was the normal practice in those days, and for many years thereafter, certainly up until the 1960s, from what I hear from a lot of people and read in my sources, and my senseis and people I know and respect and admire have told me this, who trained in Japan during those years. It was common for even high-ranking Dan grades just to wear a black belt in practice, and the red and white belt, or the red belt, was reserved for special occasions, or teaching seminars, teaching training camps, that type of thing. The red and white belt wasn't normally worn every day. And there's some austerity to doing that. It's normal practice. You wear your black belt. You're a Yudansha. And for the special occasions, you can break out the red and white belt or the red belt. But we've kind of morphed into a little more than that, where you and I both have seen a lot of people walking around all the time wearing a red and white belt. That's great. That's kind of the norm thing now. But in those days, it wasn't done too much. So that was a bit of an etiquette. Okay. There's a little talk about real quickly a little bit of etiquette as well. A number of years ago, I attended a clinic with a very good judo man, and I brought him into Kansas City, and he brought 2 belts with him. He was like a 7th, or I think he was a 7th Dan at the time. Anyway, he brought 2 belts with him, one a black belt and one a red and white belt. And I asked him why he did that, and I was a young coach at the time, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you why." He said, "For etiquette." He said, he said, I know you're the host, but you also have other people there who are higher ranking, and if they're wearing, I normally wear my black belt, he said, but he said, if they're wearing a red and white belt, he said, it's the etiquette that I should also wear my rank as well. Okay. And also, if you're going to a dojo and, you go say the man's a 6th, 7th, 8th Dan, and he's just wearing a black belt at practice, and you go visit his dojo. You're a visitor, you're a guest. Don't try to one up him by wearing the red and white belt. Wear the black belt. If he's wearing a black belt, say he's a 7th Dan, and he's wearing a black belt, then it's proper etiquette that you wear a black belt as well, because you're the guest in the dojo. And I thought that made a lot of sense. Okay, so that was very good. It was a good form of etiquette. I think that's one thing we should probably start doing again. A number of people don't. So I will chastise those who don't. But if you want to do it, that's okay. Again, I'm probably going to get a lot of nasty emails about this, but it's the way I believe. Okay. Um, so we know that, and it was really, let's again jumping ahead now. 1932, we talked about the different colors of belts being changed. Really, up until 1942, the standards for the different dan grades were fluctuating on a regular basis. And in 42, this is after Kano died, the Kodokan established fairly structured ranks, what syllabus standards for ranks for the black belts especially. So it was fluid up that time. So ranks have always been this thing. We've always had a fluidity and problems with ranks or good things with ranks. It's always been this way ever since they were invented back in 1883 to 1884. But let's talk about, remember a few minutes ago I talked about giving structure. So when Kano developed a rank system to give structure to his fledgling Kodokan, he also started at that time to develop a series of kata, structured forms, to provide, again, structured training, structured education and training. And that's why he developed the kata. So the kata kind of went hand in hand, not necessarily, identical, but they were developed at the same time as the rank structure was being developed. Again, to provide structure and learning. And that's Kano being an educator. That's what he wanted to do. And from 1884 through 1886, Kano developed the first two kata, the Nagi no kata, the throwing form of throwing, and the Katami no kata, the form of locking or holding, or ground fighting. Okay, the form of ground fighting. Okay, so and those two were come to be called and still are called the Randori no kata, the forms of free play, forms of open training, because those were primarily the ones those were skills that were allowed in competitive contest judo, with nage waza and katame waza, and then for subsequent years, Kano, starting about 1887, he developed the Juno kata, the Kime no kata, Koshiki no kata, and eventually the Itsutsu no kata, which he really never finished. That came later, I think in the 20s or 30s. I can't remember exactly when he developed that. Gleason wrote a lot about that in his books. But that's when these structures were formed. And again, I get a lot of this information again from Sid Hoare, from Don Drager, Gleason, John Stevens, Clark, others. Very good research into this. I'm passing it along to you because I'm a geek on this stuff and I love it. But it's important to know, like the old mariner saying, if you don't know where you came from, if you don't know where you started, you sure don't know where you are now, and you sure don't know how to get there, where you're going or how to get there. So I think in the study of rank and what ranks are about, we need to know some history of how it came about. Okay, so to even muddy the waters even more, in 1895, a group called the Buto Kukai, in fact, it was called the Dai Nippon Buto Kukai, the All Japan Martial Arts Confederation, pretty much, or association, was formed. And it was more of a governmental entity with their headquarters in Kyoto. And they were really a rival of the Kodokan. Okay. Now, remember, Kano being the brilliant seller of judo that he was, salesman of judo that he was, people liked that rank thing. And it attracted a lot of new people to the Kodokan. Well, the Buto Kukai, again, it was a rival. It was Kano and the Kodokan joined because it was a governmental agency, as I believe it was a quasi or maybe had official recognition from the government, and their job was to regulate all the martial arts of Japan. Okay, so you can see how the martial arts and the culture, the martial history of the fighting arts in Japan had quite a bit of importance, even in the modernization of Japan. From the Meiji period on, it was still an important deal culturally and socially. So enough that the Japanese government, formulated this group. And in 1902, the Budokukai established its formal ranking system. Now, they still, because the Kano system was so popular. In fact, Kano used the system I'm going to describe here in a moment for a brief period of time as well for his Kodokan, but he dropped it. But it was the Butokukai. Again, they were drawing back on the older martial disciplines, the Budo Bugei disciplines of the license or the Menkyo system. Okay, a Menkyo is a license to teach, and in the old system, the old jujitsu and kenjutsu and all that stuff, you had basically 4 levels of students, and they fluctuated depending on the system or the ruha, but you had four levels of students. You had the inka. It was the person was there with permission. Okay, it was the newbie, the new student. Then you had the chuden, middle. Chu means middle. Okay, and den is another way of saying dan. It's middle step. Then you had the okuden. Oku is secret, something secret, or the inner workings. It means secret, but it also means an inside person. And the okuden, the inside grade, the inner workings, the secret levels of a system, of a ruha. And then the highest we could get was your Menkyo Kaiden. Your teaching, a Kaiden was the highest grade. It was the master grade. And if you got your Menkyo at that point, that's where you got it when you attained your Kaiden and you became a Menkyo Kaiden. You were a licensed master of that particular jujitsu system. And again, jujitsu, J-U-T-S-U, J-I-T-S-U, J-I-T-S-U had more use later in the years. And we tend to say that easier. It rolls off the tongue better for us, for those of us who live in the West. So I'll continue now to say jujitsu. It's easier for me to say, actually. But in 1902, the Budokukai established a system along the lines of the old jujitsu ruha. But there are various different ways of doing it, but they had 3 basic levels. A rinshi, which is a student. A rinshu means to practice or to train, a trainee. Okay, and a shi is, in other words, a person who performs it or does it. So a rinshi is a student or a trainer. Okay, a trainee. A kyoshi was a teacher, and you had to, I think, when Kano used it to his system a little bit, you had to be, I think, at least a level of Godan, 5th Dan, at that point to be later on to be a kyoshi. And the hanshi was a professor, hanshi. Now there are other variations of that, slight changes of those, the different phraseology of those, but those are the 3 primary levels. And other groups have them. We also have, we use it in judo more traditionally. A shihan means past master. One who is an expert, past master, shihan. A soke is the person who is I think the founder and head of a particular system of jujitsu or a bugei or budo, some type of fighting art. And also a sensei. Sensei pretty much means honored person, honored teacher, and that's an honorific term. And when I was in Japan, I heard people calling each other like gym coaches over here. Hey, sensei. Hey, coach. How you doing? And so it was used, but it was still an honorific title. You didn't call just anybody sensei. He had to be a coach. He had to be someone who had some standing within the group. And so sensei is still used to that degree. So when we talk about titles or ranks or the world of belts, if you're an 18-year-old black belt, I hate to burst your bubble, son or young lady, but you're not a sensei yet, okay? You have to go through some formal education, okay? Being a shodan doesn't make you a sensei. Being a black belt doesn't make you an instructor or a coach or a sensei, okay? So it's time to grow up and get over that. I'm sorry again if I offended people, but that is absolutely true. Okay, so in fact, I'm very careful who I call sensei to, because I look at them. I look at these people who have accomplished something, who are well educated in coaching and teaching. So just because you're a tough guy and you can throw everybody in the dojo, or you're a national champion and you do clinics, maybe you're not a sensei yet. Maybe you're a very skilled technician. Good for you. But at the same time, I think it takes some formal education to become that honored term sensei. Okay. And that's where you get your coach education. And I think it's very important when one gets to be a black belt. I know we've done this here at Welcome Mat, and we're doing that. And John Saylor and I have been embraced this entirely with our Judo Black Belt Association. And also, we have written this into our guidelines for the International Freestyle Judo Alliance. If when a black belt is awarded, any groups doing that within with the Freestyle Judo Alliance, any groups who do that, we make them, one of the things in the code of conduct they sign, besides a lot of other really important stuff, is that they really understand that attaining a black belt doesn't give them permission to teach. They are not a licensed instructor or a qualified instructor. It's basically you get your shodan based on what you know and what you have performed, and at that level, basic level of education. Again, at the college degree, I liken it back to a college bachelor's degree. Just because you get your bachelor's degree from a university or college doesn't mean you can go out and teach. You have to get a teacher's certificate to do that. To get a teacher's license. So, and that's separate from getting your bachelor's. And I think that should be the same way with what we do in the martial arts. And I think we need to take that very seriously. So there are some things to study about that. Also, another thing in the rank structure, it needs to be said, are the concept of senpai kohai. Now, oh boy, you're really getting off in the deep woods here with this, Steve. Well, let's look at a junior-senior system. A kohai is a junior and a senpai is the senior. So someone who is, and I use this all the time, and I have for years in my teaching at my club. And we have a senpai kohai system. It's not real structured or formal where, it's kind of like college fraternity or hazing or any of that stuff as it may be done in Japan. But certainly it fits our Western culture here in the United States for me, in that I use that because the more advanced students help the newer students learn, and they kind of take them under their wing. And so that new person is the kohai, and the older person, or not the older, but the more advanced person, is the senpai. And that's a good system for helping a teacher or a coach like me manage the mat and have his brown belts help the white belts. The black belts help the brown belts, and they have from the start. Okay, and sometimes you'll have that one person in the dojo who is your senpai, and you look up to him. And there's several people who I consider senpais, who are my seniors, and they should be. Okay, and there are other people who look to me as their senpai, not necessarily their sensei or their primary coach, but a person who has helped them. And so the senpai kohai system really does work. And let's take that to Western culture. A Catholic tradition of St. Augustine said, or Christian tradition, if you wish, blessed is he who teaches, for he learns twice. So think about that. So if you're the senpai, you've been blessed because you're learning more about your craft, your art, whatever it may be, by teaching a new guy, the newbie. And you're passing on those things, and you're learning more about that skill or technique or whatever it may be subject by teaching it to someone else. And that is very relevant in what we're doing. And so, and I bring St. Augustine up because no matter what the culture, it transcends culture, from one to the other. So that's how important I think the senpai kohai relationship is and should be used. But in any event, so here we are now in 2015 as I'm doing this video. I'm just looking over my notes as to follow up into how we have got here with ranks, okay? So no matter what your martial art, there is a rank structure to it. Now, not always, that may not always be true. Now, Sambo, I think there's some kind of a rank structure that the International Amateur Sambo Federation has. They have different animal symbols or something. There is no belt structure really. You have a red jacket or your blue jacket, you're either red or blue, whatever, So, and I think in the running a sports organization like we do in AAU Judo, when we have two athletes on the mat, it depends on the color of the scoreboard. One might be wearing a white belt, another might be wearing a red or blue belt, whatever the scoreboard corresponds to. So in running a sports organization, belts really have no place. Either because you've got to manage the sport of it, and the colored belt really has no relevance to sometimes what goes on the mat. Sometimes it does, but how often have we seen a white belt who is a super stud go out and slam some black belt with something he doesn't even know how to pronounce the name of? Okay, so we've seen that happen too. So ranks have to be separated purely from competitive ability. Now, competitive ability has to come into it. Okay, that's why we have Batsugan or field promotions. But those are done under limited circumstances. The person has to have a good base of knowledge before one can attain a Batsugan in getting a rank promotion. So, you just can't go out and show up and beat a bunch of black belts. I had an athlete of mine who I think he competed for me for quite some time. He was an excellent athlete, and I think he literally went 4 years of beating a whole lot of black belts. Went up from white belt on up through his brown belt ranks as he learned more judo. And finally, when he had the skill set to attain Shodan, I promoted him. And he was cool with that. He said, "Yeah, I've beaten probably 50 black belts so far, but I just happened to beat him in that competition that day. That didn't mean they were better men or had better judo, whatever. He just beat him competitively. And yeah, he did have better judo at that time, possibly, but he was also very athletic. So again, let's not mistake beating somebody up and being a tougher guy in randori or a competition, and he should be his. You should, if you beat somebody who's a second dan, you should be at least that, right? Let's go away from that. Let's take rank for what I believe Kano meant it to be, and I think it should be. I hope I've convinced you to look at rank in an educational way. That if you attain a Shodan in whatever martial art you do, it is equivalent. Again, it's not the same. It's not like I have a college degree, don't get me wrong, but it's our equivalent to getting a bachelor's degree from a university or college. Okay? Now, you can get your bachelor's degree online I make a joke about I invented a college called South Waldo University because I live in South Waldo part of Kansas City. So I started my own school, South Waldo University. And you can get a black belt from a South Waldo University like that. Pardon me for getting out there fast. But you know what I mean. You can get a degree from kind of an unaccredited college or not a very good one, or you can get one from a good school. Okay. And we should try to be that good school. We should try to give those good ranks to people, award those good ranks. Don't give them, don't sell them, make them earn them. And how I look at it, rather briefly, and to wrap things up here a little quickly here, Shodan is like your initial grade. It is your bachelor's degree. Shodan, Nidan. Nidan is really an advanced form of Shodan. And after a period of study and period of more formation and development, skill, education, training. Then you go on to Sandan and Yodan, third and fourth dan. Okay, that is your bachelor's degree, that is your master's degree, equivalent to I'm using an analogy to universities. Once you get Godan on up, there's your PhD. Okay, Godan, Rokudan, fifth, sixth dan, that's your PhD. Okay, and really, my friend John Saylor in his organization, the Shingetai organization, he only has 5 dan grades. And he said for that purpose. He said it's, he looks at it from an educational point of view as well as I do. We both talked on this a lot. And we've influenced each other's thinking on this. So if you look at a Godan as, don't call yourself professor or anything like that, but you have attained a skill level, an education level in whatever martial art it is, of being, a very high level of equivalent to analogous to a professor in our college system. So there you have it. If you look at it that way, I think it makes more sense, even the more than some people look at it like military rank. But I think this even because Kano was an educator, he's the guy that developed all this stuff. And I think if we look at it as an educational tool, to do it. But again, let's understand, rank, whatever rank you are, that is your relevance or status in the structure you're in. Okay, so that doesn't mean if you are a very high-ranking black belt in some martial art, one martial art, and you can retain that into another martial art. Okay, you don't. I had a guy, again, the world of belts. I had a guy actually email me. He didn't have the guts to call me. I asked him to call me, which he stopped bugging me then. But he actually emailed me several times, wanting to get his equivalency, his black belt equivalency in judo. So I emailed him back. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I've studied this, I've studied that, I've studied different martial arts, and I believe I have a good enough knowledge of judo to get an equivalency of a black belt in judo." And I wrote this going email, and I wrote him back, "You got to do judo to get a black belt in judo. I mean, if you want a bachelor's degree in physical education, you got to major in physical education. If you want a bachelor's degree in mathematics, you got to take math classes. That's got to be your major. You can't get a math degree and study physical education, or vice versa." And I tried to explain that to him. He said, "Well, because he has such a broad knowledge of this stuff, he thought he should get a equivalency in a black belt." And I said, "Well, no." And then, of course, we got down to brass tacks. He wrote me, "What would it cost me?" Okay, dollars and cents. And I wrote him back, "No, I don't sell ranks. We believe in sweat equity. I suggest you try somebody else." He, in fact, did actually call a friend of mine, and she told him the exact same thing as me. And in fact, she was a lot ruder about it than I was. So we get those kind of guys, okay, and deal with them, I guess, professionally as you can. But anyway, that's a little bit in my take on the world of belts. We have to look at where we are, and if you're really worried about your belt, you probably got your focus in the wrong place. Now, you may be, and let me take that back. Some people, because they may run afoul of the wrong person, they refuse to buy it from a particular organization or get involved politically in some way, they're overlooked. Okay, I know about that myself, but we need to also understand that if that's the case, then I think rank the government shouldn't dictate it. One organization shouldn't. I don't think a bureaucrat should issue rank, although they do. Okay, but I believe in the old system of the Yodanshikai, as Kano originally formulated in 1922, where you have a localized, it's like a college degree. You can get a college degree from Harvard, or you can get a college degree from some university in the Caribbean. Nothing against the Caribbean, but they're there, so that has no good standing, no educational form or formation. You can get it from one or the other, but there's no United States college education bachelor program. I mean, it's depends on the institution, the quality of the institution. And the Yodanshikai, a black belt association, does that. It's more local, and that's what we've done here, certainly in Kansas City, and what John Saylor's done with his organization as well. And we have our own Yodanshikai, and that's what we saw really in the early years of the formation of judo in the United States. Regional Yodanshikais that formed into a national one, and that's, I think, where we got into trouble. We became not close enough to the person at the dojo level to see their real skills. So belts have considerable ramification in our culture we live in the world of belts, in this world of martial arts, and we need to look at them seriously, and we need to take them seriously, and not just issue them based on who's the toughest guy, who's your favorite, or who pays you the most money, or any other reason other than a good educational base. So I rambled on about that enough. And again, I'm sure I'll get some nasty emails. I'll expect them. And hopefully I'll get some nice emails too about some of the things I've said. If I've missed any points, it's certainly because I'm winding out of steam here. It's been almost an hour. So that's enough of me. So anyway, well, I will see you on the other side with another edition of our Kaizen about another subject very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.